Hi, and welcome to Meetings in Math. You are here for 6.1, percents and decimals. Our essential question for today is, how can I write numbers as fractions, decimals, or percents? Today you will need your Jaguar dots on sections 6.1 and 6.2a. A pen, pencil, or a highlighter might be helpful. Your calculator might be helpful for keeping things moving along. Perseverance, and always bring your problem-solving skills and some self-confidence. Let's get started with a definition of percent. Percent means out of 100. And so everything that we're going to be looking at means that we're going to start with this idea of how can we convert something to meaning out of 100. So let's begin with looking at how do we change a fraction to a percent. And there's two basic methods that we're going to look at today. And the first one is method number 1, and it's to rewrite the fraction with a denominator of 100. So we're looking at equivalent fractions. So if I have 3/4, 4 times what is 100? And I know that if I multiply my 4 by 25, I get 100. So I'm also going to multiply my 3 by 25, because that's how I get equivalent fractions, is I make sure that I multiply by this thing. If you want to think of it as a giant 1, 25 over 25 is a giant 1, then I have equivalent fractions. So 3 times 25 is 75. So I know that 75 out of 100, I know that that would make this 75%. So that's one way we can look at this. So let's do another one. I know that 25 times 4 is 100, so I can multiply the bottom by 4. But if I multiply the bottom by 4, I also have to multiply the top by 4. So 2 times 4, I know, is 8. So I know that 2/25 is also 8%. So that's one way that we can do it. Another way that we can do this is through proportions. So that means that I can look at a proportion and solve it using inverse operations. So if I am dividing by 100, I undo that with multiplying by 100, both sides. So this means 100 divided by 8 is 12.5. So I know that 1/8 is 12.5%. So I can also do that on this next one. Same idea. I'm going to multiply by 100. So I'm going to have 100 times, and so I do need to figure out what 5/9 is going to be, because 9 doesn't go into 100 nicely. I do need to figure out what 5/9 is going to be, which is 0.555556. I'm going to round that to the nearest thousandths. So when I multiply by 100, that's going to move it over 2 decimal places. So 55.6. So I can say that 5/9 is equal to 55.6%. So these are two very efficient ways to find moving a fraction into a percent. I use a variation of method 2. I take my fraction and I divide it, and then I just move my decimal place over 2. So pretty much how I did this one, but they work very, very much so the same. So now moving a decimal to a percent. Moving a decimal to a percent, you multiply the decimal by 100 and then you write the decimal sign. So why 100? Well, it gets back to because percents are out of 100. And so it's just changing it into that percent. So you just multiply it by 100. So if we looked at 0.74 times 100, you get 74%. But there's a really fast way to do this. If you start picking up on it, there's 2 zeros, and it's going to just move that decimal place over 1, 2. And so you can do this very, very quickly in your head if you're really good at it. But if you're not, that's okay, because sometimes you really do need to write it out. So 100 times 0.3, so 0.3 times 100. So 0 times 3, 100. Placeholder times 100. Oh, there's another placeholder. And then times 1, so that would be a 3. And then you have to count how many decimal places you had, right? And so it would go right there. And so you end up with 30. Again, if you were at 0.3 and you moved it over 2 decimal places, you'd end up at 30. You can really do it interchangeably either way. You just need to be very careful about showing both of those decimal places. So if you have 5.4 and you want to go 2 decimal places, 1, 2, you end up at 540%. So you can have it bigger than 100. What would have that looked like if you longhand multiplied it out? This one would probably be easier to do that way. 4 times 0 is 0, and a 0, and a 4, placeholder, a 0, and a 5. 0, 0, 4, and a 5, and then you had 1, so you'd have to bring it in 1, and you still get your 540. So you can do these. It's just you have to be careful with understanding how to multiply by decimals and making sure you're going in the right direction. These are the ones that people usually get wrong, this last one, mostly because they're just rushing. So let's make sure we do it right. 0.025. I made some big gaps here. So when we multiply, that number has to get bigger. Multiplication makes numbers bigger. In this case, when you're multiplying by a big number, it gets bigger. When you multiply by decimals, they get smaller. So we have to go 2. So 1, 2. So we didn't get into a great big number, but it is bigger than the number we started with, 2.5. So on the next one, we're going to do percents to fractions. The first thing you want to do is you want to change it into a decimal and then write that as a fraction, and then don't forget to simplify. There's some other ways that some people do this, and that's okay. If you learned it a different way, that's fine. You can do that too. So 16% as a decimal, you have to go now backwards to before we were going this way, to the right. So now to go back into the decimal, we're going to go to the left. So it's going to become 0.16 because I had to get smaller. That is 1600ths. I just said the fraction, 1600ths. Then we reduce 1600ths. They are both divisible by 4. So remember that when we reduce, you have to do both the top and the bottom, and we get 4/25. So here on the next one, again, where the number has to get smaller. So when we go to a decimal, it has to get smaller. So you're going to go 2 decimal places. So 1, 2. So it's going to become 1.57 or 1/57. So did you hear we said that again? We already said what the decimal is going to be. 157 over 100. And then we need to check if that reduces. If it doesn't reduce, we're just going to stay what it is, and it doesn't. So we just stay there. Okay, on this next one, we have 0.4% or 0.4%. This one's much smaller. We're not even at a full percent yet. So when we make this one into a decimal, we do need to be careful. So I want to make this one a little bit bigger so we can talk about it. So when we go to make this one a decimal, remember, we're still moving to the left to make it a decimal, and we still have to go 1, 2. That's our new decimal place. We have to put a 0 there and then the leading 0. So we're going to be at 0.004 or 4 thousandths. And when we say that, I just told you what the denominator is going to be. It's going to be 1,000 because that's how we say this number. 4 thousandths. So let's go ahead and take a look at that one. So 4 thousandths, and those are both divisible by 4. And so that's 1 over 250. And if you aren't sure if you have this right, you can plug 1 divided by 250 into a calculator and check your work and see if you come back to that same decimal. Okay, the last one, 45%. Go ahead and try that on your own, and then we'll go ahead and check your answer. So you should have gotten 45 hundredths as your decimal, so 45 over 100, and then those are both divisible by 5, and you get 9/20ths. So there's this thing in your Jaguar Jots, it kind of looks like this. It isn't exactly have all of the things that we just talked about, but it is kind of nice because it helps us remember when do we multiply and when do we divide. So when we were looking at this first step of going from the percent into the decimal, we were really dividing by 100. That's how we were doing, moving the decimal over. This was changing it to a decimal was through division by 100. That's how we were doing it. So this is going to help us out with understanding that. So the first thing that we do when we are changing from a decimal to a percent is we multiply by 100. That's usually the one that everybody's pretty comfortable with. When we go from a percent to a decimal, that's what we just finished doing. We divide by 100. That should make sense. They're inverse operations. When we go from a fraction to a decimal, we divide the numerator by the denominator. That's going from a fraction to a decimal. And then when we want to go from the percent to the fraction, we're going to put the percent over the denominator of 100 and then simplify. So this is just kind of nice because it kind of gives us a way to think about how to go between them, and it helps us out. So what if we wanted to go from a fraction to a percent? Well, that's when we divide by the denominator and then we multiply by 100. So we can do 2 steps to do that one. So that was percents and decimals and fractions and all that things to do conversions. And why do we want to be good at this? So that we can use which one's going to help us the most at any time. What I'd like you to do is I would like you to explain to somebody how to convert a fraction to a percent. Make sure you understand that well enough that you can explain it to somebody. Thank you so much for showing up today and learning how to do this with us. And remember, be kind to each other because we can all use some extra kindness in our lives. Bye for now.